In this section, the authors also argue that rock challenged a lot of other distinctions in our culture and society, like the distinction between high and low culture, female and male gender roles, the distinction between rural country life and the city, categories distinguishing between North and South, and religious and the secular. And the authors argue that a lot of artists really blurred these distinctions. So, for instance, with gender roles, you had performers like Little Richard that would dress up in these flamboyant, feminine outfits. And I think even later on, you had 1970s glam rock, where performers like David Bowie would dress up in these androgynous costumes. So there still is this a kind of blurring of gender roles. I think you also see this blurring of religious and secular ideas that also continues later on through the music of Madonna in the 1980s. I'm thinking of the classic hit of hers, Like a Prayer, where the music and the video for the song really incorporated a lot of religious imagery in ways that was very controversial at the time. But I guess I would also add that while at many points rock and popular music has kind of challenged these conventional distinctions, in other ways it reinforces these distinctions and categories. Like, for instance, when we're talking about gender, I think a lot of rock and popular music have reinforced traditional masculine gender roles, where a lot of popular music, especially in the realm of hip-hop and rap, represents males as tough, strong, aggressive, sexually aggressive, and domineering towards women. So it's interesting to think about the ways in which popular music may challenge and blur these conventional distinctions, where in other instances it might reinforce those distinctions. As rock became more successful, the music business was involved in a number of controversial practices, one of which was the treatment of African American artists. In order for their music to be more successful, what major record labels would do would be to have white artists do cover versions of music that was originally recorded by black artists. The thinking here was that if well-known white artists did softer versions of songs originally recorded by black artists, that those songs might have more widespread appeal. So they had artists like, musicians like Pat Boone do a lot of cover versions of music by black artists. Now, the record labels and these white artists were very successful, but they wound up overshadowing the music originally recorded by the black artists. And a lot of times these black artists were kind of left out in the cold and not becoming as successful as these white artists that had a lot of backing from the big record labels. Another controversial practice that the industry was involved in was payola. That's a practice where a record label or one of its representatives would pay radio stations a lot of money to to play music by its artists. A lot of times, the record labels or companies affiliated with them would pay disc jockeys money under the table so that those DJs would play music by the artists that were signed to that record label. And that controversial practice received a lot of negative attention in the press, and it was investigated by the U.S. government, by Congress, and it was used as an example in the mainstream media to illustrate how corrupt the music business was. And also in the 1950s and 60s, you had a lot of criticism of popular music and rock music as contributing to delinquency by young people. The argument here is that rock and risque popular music encouraged young people to be more sexually free, to have promiscuous sex, to drink more, to do drugs, and essentially act in very inappropriate ways. But some scholars wonder whether or not there was this real fear of the impact of rock and roll, or if all of this concern was really just a worry about young people rebelling and being nonconformist. This section on folk music and rock in the 1960s points out that a lot of times popular music of a particular era reflects the social values and events of that era. That the 1960s, of course, were a time of really intense social protest where young people were rebelling against authority. They were involved in anti-war protests. There was a lot of challenges to government authority and a lot of rebellion against parents. So a lot of the folk music of the 1960s was based on this kind of political protest and social activism. So artists like Bob Dylan and Joan Baez really spoke to protests against the war, protests against authority that were very symbolic of what was going on in that era. And also a lot of rock performers in the 1960s, like the Doors, the Grateful Dead, wrote a lot about sex and drugs, and that a lot of the music, a lot of the rock of that era reflected a lot of widespread experimentation with drugs in the 60s, and also the more kind of open social attitudes about sex. Now, even though this section is on the 1960s, I think it raises some interesting questions about today. If we are making the argument that the popular music of a time reflects the social values and political issues of an era. What does that say about popular music of today? How can we say that music today reflects the values of our contemporary society? I also think what's interesting is that in the 1960s, a lot of folk and rock music was very focused on being opposed to the war. A lot of music explicitly presented anti-war um, messages and themes. Again, because this music took place in the context of the Vietnam War and protests by young people against that war. What I think is interesting is that over the past decade, even though there has been some opposition to the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we didn't really seem to have a lot of music, popular music, that was either for or against that military intervention. So it's interesting to think about what was it about the 1960s that encouraged a lot of artists to speak out against the war, whereas today a lot of musicians don't really seem to actively comment on that, or at least we don't hear about it when we listen to the radio.